I was interviewed earlier this week by a radio reporter for a possible inclusion in a short segment about religious communities confronting this winter and the circumstances in which the world and our country are facing this winter. And in the course of the interview, she asked me if there was a text or a prayer or some element of our tradition that I was thinking of that felt particularly relevant to this winter. And she said, the end of 2020, the beginning of 2021, which of course is not a Jewish date change, right? So I answered whatever I answered, and if the interview ever is published, I'll share it with the community. But as is often the case, after the interview, I thought of a better answer. And the words that have been in my head in recent days are the words of the popular Israeli song. Maybe you've heard it at weddings over the last 10, 15 years or so. Am hanetzach lo mefached miderech aruka. The Breslovers like to sing it. The eternal nation is not afraid of a long journey. Because of our identity as Am hanetzach, as an eternal people, we need not fear marching in a direction that will take a long time, maybe a journey of generations. We don't have to fear a journey of generations, the derech arukah, because we're Am hanetzach. We have that capacity of being an eternal people, a people who transcend time. We have the resiliency baked in from the stories of our ancestors and what they experienced, and the faith that wherever we don't achieve, whatever we don't attain in our lifetime, future generations of Jews will exist to take on that mantle, to pick up the baton and carry forth our mission as representatives of HaKadosh Baruch Hu through our embrace of Torah and mitzvah. Am hanetzach lo mefached miderech arukah. And I think that's such a germane message for this winter, this dark, cold, frightening winter, where so many are suffering from experiencing COVID fatigue, that they're throwing off caution and giving into despair. Hopefully, we can avoid that by connecting to our capacity as Am hanetzach. We're an eternal people. Our grandparents survived 3 years in bunkers in the Polish countryside. Our parents and grandparents struggled to build lives for us here in America under conditions of great adversity. And we have resiliency baked in from our ancestors going back thousands of years, and faith in future generations of Jews who the prophets promised us will somehow, in some way, survive and endure forever. And hopefully that can give us some resilience to make it through this winter. God forbid I'm not minimizing any of the real causes for fear, the real frightening things and the real dangers that exist, the real sadness that exists. But I hope our identity as Am hanetzach can be a source of strength. It's been a source of strength for me, and I hope for you as well. I believe this is a very relevant message for Hanukkah too. The Sfas Emes, whom I've quoted many times, the great Hasidic master of the dynasty of Ger from the late 19th century, writes that Hanukkah and Purim are similar, of course, as both being rabbinic holidays, post-Torah holidays, and therefore we can contrast them and ask questions one from another. And the Sfas Emes asks that a question that the Talmud asks pertaining to Purim is also very relevant for Hanukkah as well. The Talmud says that Hallel is not recited on Purim because Akate Avdei Achashverosh, we remain the servants of Achashverosh. The story ends, the Megillah is over, and the Jews of Shushan are still vulnerable to a capricious and foolish and cruel king. And the story doesn't contain the sort of complete redemption that would warrant Hallel, singing out psalms of praise as part of Shachrit. We don't sing Hallel on Purim morning. That's one of the reasons the Talmud gives in Masechet Megillah for why Hallel is not recited on Purim. So Sfas Emes says that same objection can be raised for Hanukkah. The story ends without a complete redemption. The Chashmonaim remain very much subject to larger empires, of which their kingdom is formerly a territory of much larger empires. And of course, the governments that they set up very, very quickly end up being quite oppressive and corrupt. and the whole thing falls apart in a very short period of time. So Akate Adira Hashveros. We didn't really achieve a lasting redemption at the time of Hanukkah. The Hanukkah miracle was not a full breaking free from an oppressive and dangerous and frightening political context for sure. So why then is Hallel recited? Hallel is recited all 8 days of Hanukkah. It's the central way that Hanukkah is celebrated during the daytime. At night, of course, we light candles. During the day, we recite Hallel, full Hallel with a bracha for all 8 days of Hanukkah. And Sfat Emes says it's precisely because the redemption was not a complete redemption in this political sphere where we were free from subjugation the way we were freed from subjugation in Egypt. That didn't happen in the time of Hanukkah. Rather, what happened is we learned to light candles in a time of darkness. We learned to recognize the miraculous in the context of the unredeemed Zman Hazeh, everyday mundane world. Okay, and that capacity to see God and see the miraculous in the unredeemed mundane world and to find light during a very dark time, that's the cause, that insight, that ability, that capacity to light a candle, to see light, and to see a miraculous light in a time of darkness is the reason for reciting Hallel in the morning. We're celebrating that capacity that was given to us at the time of Hanukkah. Going back a few generations in that same Gerer Hasidic dynasty, we go back to the Kutzker Rebbe. We noted that in the Al Hanisim prayer, which is added to Birkat HaMazon, grace after meals, and is added into the Amidah 3 times a day for all 8 days of Hanukkah, plus Mosaf on Shabbat, the Al Hanisim prayer makes reference to our Greek professors and their act of subversion, and in the context of describing what they did and what we suffered, it makes use of the phrase "Lashkicha mitoratecha." They tried to make us forget the Torah. Forgetting the Torah is very different from suppressing the Torah. Suppressing the Torah can be done through external force. Imposing external force can prevent the observance of mitzvah. And that was also part of the Greek oppression. But the opening phrase of Al Hanisim says, "Lashkicha mitoratecha." They tried to make us forget the Torah. And that's something that takes place entirely internally within our minds. And so there was an internal struggle, okay, in our own sense of how much we're going to connect to the Jewish story, how much we're going to care about Torah and mitzvot, how much we're going to remember the Torah and celebrate the Torah versus allowing it to be forgotten. Okay, that's an internal decision that we can make, just like the internal decision to light a candle and to see lightness in the midst of darkness. Just like the internal decision we can make to connect to and embrace our identity as Am HaNetzach, as an eternal people, and therefore Lo Mefached. We can avoid fear, please God, in the midst of some dark times and a long journey that is ahead of us. I wish you all a happy Hanukkah, safe and warm winter, okay, and may your lights grow over Hanukkah and provide inspiration and illumination for whatever dark times may be in the future, and please may they be very brief and infrequent. Okay, Shabbat Shalom.